Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Okay, well, welcome everybody to the Line of Sight podcast. And my guest today is Old One Eye, the voice behind the One Page More, One Page Rules lore channel. So thank you very much for joining me this evening, and I look forward to a great conversation with you. So let me start just by asking you the same question that I ask everybody else. How did you get into tabletop wargaming, miniature wargaming, hobbies like that?
Okay, yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me. It's fantastic to be here. For me, I came to tabletop wargaming way later in life than most people I know. So I would say I was 22 at the time when I was serving my mission for my church in Brazil, and a Brazilian came up with his own rules for a tabletop war game based off of World of Warcraft.
Oh,
And I'd
okay.
never even heard of wargaming before that, even though I've been extremely nerdy my entire life, never came across it. And so I played his very poorly designed wargaming system.
Must have been his
But
first go at it.
I hope so. After that, when I came back, I met up with one of my friends from high school, and it turns out he's an avid wargamer and has been for his entire life. He brought me into the fold after that with Warhammer Fantasy 6th edition, and I played probably 50, 60 matches against him and maybe won 2 or 3 of them.
And you stuck
And
with it.
yes, I
That's
did.
admirable.
And then after that, we continue growing, moved into Warhammer 40K. But I actually never owned an army until I made my own army. Like, I have a Zerg army that I did the 3D modeling for. Before that, I had maybe 5 models from the Tyranid line.
Those
That,
STLs on cults, those are your designs?
yes, most of them,
Well,
yes.
ain't that something? Because I think I'm about to print a bunch of those for a project I have for the channel.
Well, I apologize.
No,
Enjoy printing and painting those.
that was one of the because I was looking. I don't want to spill the beans too much, but for my listeners, I do have I needed an alien hive army for an idea I have coming up, but I didn't want to just go with Tyranids from 40K. And I'm thinking, well, what could I do? And instantly I thought, well, StarCraft. If you're not going to do the 40K one, you got to do StarCraft. So I started looking for Zergs, and there's not that much out there. So when I saw those ones, I thought, well, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Now there's a
Great.
small world.
Yeah. I kind of did the exact same thing as you. Well, from the standpoint of I really like the Tyranids because I like the Zerg. And during the pandemic, I actually played StarCraft 2 for the first time and fell in love with it. My friend got me into it, and I got him into the TV show Supernatural. And both of us blame each other for our new obsession. And I went from playing that and wanting to build a 40K army. So I looked up the Tyranids and saw that the army that I wanted to build would have cost me around $1,600.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I cringed so hard at that I picked up a whole new hobby of 3D printing and 3D sculpting.
Wow.
And I used I tried to build an army that would work inside of StarCraft 2 as well as in 40K. And then I created all those sculpts, based them off of the actual in-game models, and I made them all available online because they're definitely not, in my opinion, definitely not worth charging for. And there's not enough Zerg in the world. So
You can't really argue with that kind of logic. Well, I'm glad you did, because when I saw those, I thought this is exactly what I'm looking for. So I'm hoping to have everything printed up. I got to pace myself for probably within a month or two, have them all printed and then painted, and then probably in the summer actually record the the battle report that's going to actually have them. So then I guess the next question is you obviously, like most tabletop gaming nerds, cut your teeth on Warhammer. So how did you discover
Correct.
one-page rules?
Uh, while working on the Zerg army, I discovered one-page rules because I was looking for an alternative rule set because I did not want to get into ninth edition.
Oh, okay. That's actually
Um,
when I started to date other gaming systems as well.
I played around with Mantic. I wasn't a super fan of it because it just felt like I was getting into a kind of the same ecosystem as Warhammer 40K, where it has its
Was
own
that
models and it has its own rule set. And I enjoyed the activation system, but I couldn't really get into it. But then when I discovered one-page rules, I'm like, oh, I could play this with any toys. This is fantastic.
yeah, well, and since it's based on, I think, was it fifth edition ish, 40K. So yeah, you had the game rules you were looking for from the one system, but you could use your Zerg models, and it wasn't just acceptable; it was encouraged.
Exactly.
So it's like it's that nice blend. That's very similar to my story. Is I liked Eighth Edition. I know a lot of people didn't like Eighth Edition. I really liked Eighth Edition. I thought it was streamlined. It still felt like Warhammer, but it didn't get
Mm,
bogged down. And then by the time Ninth Edition came around, it was just too much. It was cumbersome. All the extra books and everything. And I thought, I'm ready for something a little different. And I can't even remember how I remembered one-page rules, but I had heard about it, and so I thought, well, why don't I give that thing a shot? Because I had heard it was for those people who are getting tired of 40K. Here's something to try, and
exactly.
the rest of the say is history. So then, what made you discovered wargaming? Then you moved over to one-page rules. So what made you decide to go into the lore side? Because you're one of the few people that you have. In case my listeners don't know, you have a YouTube channel, One
Yes.
Page More, dedicated entirely to the lore of the grimdark future. So what made you decide to get into the lore side, start recording videos? Tell me about that.
Yeah, great question. It lines up perfectly with the Zerg army, actually. So I was new to sculpting, 3D sculpting. I was new to 3D printing. So that requires both of those are hobbies in themselves and require a lot of hours. And I quickly went through all of the Tyranid lore, listening to it online, reading it while doing the hobby. Um, there's not a lot. And I had to fill those hours with something. So I started listening to StarCraft 2 lore, and then I started listening to any lore I could possibly get my hands on, and quickly ran out with anything kind of Zergy, tyranny related. And
Okay,
I thought to myself, man, I really wish One Page Rules had its own lore.
interesting.
And then a few months later, they released their lore. And I'm like, okay, before anyone else hops on this, I'm going to start making lore videos with the exclusive purpose of giving people who are working on the One Page Rules hobby something to listen to while they build their models or they paint or do whatever.
Interesting.
So that's
That's actually no, that's fantastic because I that's exactly what I've always been thinking about one page rules. I was attracted to it by the rule set. And initially the lore was simply, well, this is just 40K. Like you
Mhm.
bring 40K here and play with this rule set, but you're playing in the 40K universe. And then once I got more into the game itself and I started to realize, well, I don't want to just play 40K in a new rule set because they have some of their unique factions. I don't want them to just be a carbon copy. So is there some kind of lore on its own? And I think I made a video or two about that. And what was curious is I got a lot of viewers who they were kind of split. Some of them said they really like the fact that there's no lore for it because then they can write whatever the heck they want. But
Mhm.
on the other side, if there's no lore, then there's nothing holding it together. So how would you fall on that spectrum? How much lore would you want there to be, especially with the release of this new world book? How do we balance between them having a nice spine of lore that people can build off of, but not end up being too restrictive?
Yeah, so that is a very tough question that they're even, One Page Rules is trying to navigate right now. And to start, they're you've defined two kind of groups where it's the one who wants as much lore as they possibly can. The other was like, no, I've got 40K. I don't need more lore. There's kind of this in between ground of players who want a starting point to make their own lore. That those three groups are kind of hard to navigate, making every single one of them happy.
Right.
And I think One Page Rules has really done a good job of basically saying the lore's there if you want it. You don't have to have it, but it's there if you want it. And also trying to keep it separate from the rule set. So there's not a lot of overlap between the lore and the rule set. A good example of this is the Alien Hives. When their recent update with 3rd edition, they aligned it with the update to 10th edition of the Tyranids.
Right.
That doesn't have a lot of tie-in with the Alien Hives lore. The Alien Hives doesn't specify anything about the Neurogaunts or anything like that. It's more generic about the ecosystem, the society of the Alien Hives, and doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty of the actual models themselves. And so I think making sure that the rules and the lore are separate a little bit allows the purely wargamers to get the rule set they want and not deal with the bloat. It with the faction-specific lore that we have online now, it gives those who want that prompt to help them develop their own lore something to work with. And with a world book, it feeds the rest of us, me included, which is give me as much lore as you possibly can.
Okay. Now, I absolutely agree with that point where the lore and the rules, they don't necessarily have to line up. But what's interesting is as One Page Rules starts to kind of carve out its own space. As I've been reading through the world book, I haven't got through the whole thing. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. It's interesting to see where they're trying to say, okay, we're not just rage quit 40K anymore. We want to be our own universe, our own meta. Yes, we were deeply inspired by that, but we're trying to be all independent now. But since the rule set and the game itself started from 40K, there's some places where that break is going to be kind of difficult. For example, today I was playing a game with a friend, and he wants to start a custodian army. And he said, hey, it was really cool when I was looking at the list and I noticed that you can take sisters with them. And then I remember reading, I'm like, but the sisters don't like the custodians. And I actually had a video where I had a custodian army and I took a unit of sisters, and someone said in the comments, they said, it's kind of funny, those two would never be on the battlefield together at the same time. And so now you've got the rule set said one thing, because in 40K you can take sisters with custodies. But in the One Page Rules universe now, that wouldn't make sense. So I wonder if they're going to start slowly updating the rule set to more reflect One Page Rules rather than reflect Warhammer.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I know with 40K, in past editions, they've had rules of which factions could team up, which factions couldn't team up.
Yes.
And then in other editions, it's soup. You can mix and match however you want. And then they've kind of flip-flopped between the two. One Page Rules, with their lore, has been very careful to make it so there is a feasible reason for any faction to join up with any other faction. Okay. To its benefit and detriment for the lore. So, which is interesting because the human factions, specifically the followers of the Conduit and the Great Human Alliance, are from a lore standpoint, are the two factions most diametrically opposed to each other. And so that's you hit on one of the only parts in the lore with mixing the custodians and the battle sisters, where that wouldn't be as feasible as almost anything else. Because mixing Blessed Sisters and the Alien Hives would be more appropriate than that.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, you could do that, and there's no problem with that.
Exactly.
So I suppose I actually should have started a bit earlier with this question. What has been your initial reaction to the World Book?
Very positive. It's been incredibly enjoyable to read through the lore book. It's well written. It hits a point of nostalgia for me because it's styled in more of like a early 2000s to mid 2000s D20 RPG system book. So it reminds me a lot of some of the setting books from Pathfinder First Edition.
I was thinking that same thing as I was flipping through it. That the way it's laid out, the art style of having examples of alien races and characters. I thought, I feel like I'm flipping through a D&D Dungeon Master's Guide or something like
exactly.
that. But sorry, I cut you off.
Always an enjoyable experience to read through those. And the art is absolutely spectacular. My favorite part about the art in particular is some of the character designs in the later sections are very, very interesting. Just the way that everything meshes well of the overall design. The setting itself is more detailed than it was, but it's still on that higher level of it's like we went from a 10,000 foot view to a 5,000 foot view. So we get a little bit more of what's going on, but we don't get down to that specific level that like 40K is at, which is very enjoyable for me because I only need to read 64 pages of lore instead of 64,000 books.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you ever got into 30K and Horus Heresy. And because that was actually where I started to dive into the 40K, the Warhammer lore universe a little more was with that set of novels. But when they started dragging it out, I mean, I started reading those back when I was in college, like 15 years ago, and they've just finally ended it. And I thought, guys, come on now. It was getting a little bit too much. So I got a question for you here then. With being such a big fan of the lore, we got the OPR Writers Jam going on right now. Have you submitted to any of those?
I have in the past, yes.
Oh, okay. Are you doing this one?
I signed up for it, but we're gonna see how this weekend goes. My brother-in-law is visiting this weekend, so I might not have as much time to write as I would hope, but I'm excited for it.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, it just only makes sense if you're going to be a lore master, then it would make sense you'd want to contribute. So I imagine in the past, the submissions you did, they must have been centering around an alien hive story. I'm just guessing.
No, dwarf guilds.
Oh, dwarf guilds. Oh, that's my wheelhouse. Whereas it sounds like you always go to the alien hives. Like that's just the aesthetic, the army that you're always drawn to. For me, for some reason, it's stunty dwarves with very big beards. And I don't know why. I'm sure a psychiatrist would have plenty to say about that, but I don't know.
Which is interesting because my favorite game of all time, which is objectively the best game of all time, is Dwarf Fortress.
Oh, okay. You've played both the old and the remake?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So I've been playing since 2014.
Very nice.
Yes. So I had this plan and I completely forgot about it to do dwarf guilds for April Fools, but using gameplay from Dwarf Fortress instead of my normal pictures.
Well, now you've given away the secret. You can't use it next year. Well, I'm sure they'll forget by that point.
Yes. Maybe I'll do some modded version of Dwarf Fortress.
So tell me a little bit about your channel. I was looking through it. You have both a mix of kind of these, I wouldn't quite call them like hors d'oeuvres, but these nice short presentation videos, 5-10 minutes introducing different factions. And then it looks like you've just started doing these much longer videos, 45 minutes, some are even over an hour.
Yeah.
Before the World Book came out, how did you have enough to expand on that? Because previously, when you go to the Army Forge, you've got that one-page introduction to the faction. Just kind of here's where it came from, here it is. So how do you stretch that out into an much longer video?
Yeah. So the way I structure my videos, I have three types of videos. I have my shorts, which I just barely started doing, which are the minute-long ones. Then I have what I call lore breakdowns, which are deep dives, not a deep dive, but a focus on either a character, an event, or a faction, where I stick very closely to the lore itself, as written. And then I have my expanded lore videos. And I try to make this as obvious as possible that these are fan fictions based on the lore as written. And so some of them are more fictitious than others, but overall they have the same through line of the lore itself. And that's in those videos I do a lot of padding of time by writing stories and then doing those stories. A good example is the Soul Snatcher cults, which was my first expanded lore video, and it was almost an hour long. In that, I did 5 stories which describe the interaction of a merchant meeting a soul snatcher and becoming enamored with them, and slowly falling out to their psychic abilities and persuasive ways, and descending into madness until the last story where he embraces completely the soul snatchers and the entire society collapses around him, and it ends with him just babbling nonsense. And so I added those stories in to kind of add a little bit more flavor, and then I take the lore itself and make I try to keep it to one logical deduction away. I think, or no, one abstraction, I think is the appropriate term. So a good example would be the Soul Snatchers, it says, takes over um, an individual using its psychic powers. I'm like, okay, well, how does it do that? And I'll just try to give I'll ask why once, and then I'll try to come up with the reason why based off of what I can understand from the lore, and then I use that. I try to avoid any more abstractions than that.
Yeah,
I
you don't
also
want to go
avoid
down any rabbit holes and end up.
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And then I also avoid named places, people, or events.
Well, definitely that makes sense. Although with the world book now, there are actually, I don't know if there's any for Soul Snatchers, but we're starting to get specific, at least events, locations. I think it's one of the signs that One Page Rules is maturing from just 40K light or 40K knockoff to no, this is going to be its own thing now. So I was very interested to read through in the world book like the timeline and say, okay, they get to create, and this would be probably one of the most bestest jobs ever, to be given the task to sit down and say, okay, I get to create an entire universe, create a timeline, create all of the groups, factions, and races in this, and then I get to make up their major points in history. So I was very curious to see what parts of One Page Rules lore they were going to pin down and say, okay, this is canon, so to speak. And everyone can build according to that, but you can't say that this faction won this battle when they did not. Like, it is now, it's fixed there. So do you think you'll try and incorporate that, or are you going to try and still
100%.
stay? So, okay, building right off of what they've put in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So then what's the plans for the channel from here? Like, what's maybe next projects, or where are you going to take it from here?
That's a good question. So for the most part, I'm going to continue doing the lore breakdowns and some more of the shorts. I'm also incorporating some short stories that I've been writing. In December, to celebrate reaching 1,000 subscribers, I invited some of my viewers to come in and run a One Page Rules tournament. And so we got 16 players, and we ran a tournament. And the purpose of the tournament was for us to first have fun and celebrate, but second, for people to write up notes about their matches, and so I can take those notes and turn them into stories. And so the latest video that I did was called Defenders of the Fractured Wall. And that one covers a battle between a Jackals player and a Dow Union player, and the events that happened in the match. And so instead of doing a normal battle report, this is a narrative battle report. And so it takes it from the perspective of the leader of a spotter squad as he's going through a very, very terrible day.
That's a fascinating way to approach that. I don't know how much you were into. My guess is probably quite a bit, like science fiction and fantasy novels outside of the 40K universe, like Tolkien, Dragonlance, stuff like that. And I do remember when I read some of those much older novels set in the like Forgotten Realms or something. As I'm reading it, I'm thinking to myself, I'm reading a campaign. This isn't a novel that the guy just sat down and wrote. This is him and his friends' campaign over the course of years, and all he's doing is writing a script that goes along with it. So you've basically found a way to do that with individual matches. You take the match, and the cool part about that is you don't know the beginning from the end. You get to watch the match, see how it goes. The dice rolls throw you way off, and then you get to connect those dots with the story. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm definitely excited to do the next one. The other thing I like adding into these stories to kind of make it a little bit more than just retelling is I add in music and sound effects lining up with the events, so it feels more like a radio drama than it does, someone telling you what happened in their last D&D session or their last battle.
Right. I actually, one of the when I went to your channel just to see what kind of videos you produced, I went to the most popular ones. I said, let's see which ones do the best. And the one I did was the first one where you said you started to add some background music and some things like that. And I thought it worked really well. I know one of the problems I've had is trying to balance that. I know some of my earlier videos, I put in sound and background music and people are like, it's too loud, it's too distracting, it's this and that. So I'm like, fine, I'll just take it out. But I'm still trying to figure that balance. You obviously have got that sorted out a little bit better.
No, I just lucked out.
You just lucked out? Well, I mean, maybe
completely.
I'll keep trying and then maybe I'll luck out there too. Outstanding. So another thing I was going to ask, and the nice thing about the way this is pre-recorded is I can edit stuff out if anything you don't want to talk about or what have you. So the images in your videos, where do those come from?
Oh, I try to be as forthwith about this as possible. 99% of them were produced by the AI Midjourney.
Okay, great. That's what I wanted to know, because I do the same thing. I use the Bing image creator, but I don't know if you had this. I ask about it because I had one person that got super angry with me for using it. And I was just curious, if you did use AI, what's your take on that? Have you had, viewers say, hey, I really wish you wouldn't do that? I'm just curious.
Not as much as I was actually expecting. Occasionally I'll get a comment saying downvoting because of AI. And I frankly appreciate that, because not only did they downvote, but they also commented, and that helps the algorithm a lot.
They fell into your trap.
Exactly. But I try to use it as tastefully as I possibly can without trying to replicate anything.
Sure.
But I would much rather use that official art from One Page Rules that I could use. Or if any industrious fans out there, the few I have, wanted to produce art that I could use, then that'd be fantastic as well. I don't have money to pay anyone, unfortunately, yet, but we'll see if that changes in the future. But the thing that I've been wanting to do for a really long time is I would love to use models instead of those images.
Oh, okay.
And so setting up scenes to match up with the lore that we're talking about, and having models in, combat within terrain and night taking nice pictures, I feel like that would be way cooler than using any art.
Oh, no, I think that's a great idea too. And I had the same kind of response you did when that one person really, they sent me a comment and they said, please stop using AI art. And I responded, I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, I don't have money to pay artists. The AI's art is free. I said, if you want to draw something for me, I'll be more than happy to accept it. But, I can't pay you for it either. And then in a later video, when I did it again, he actually responded again. He's like, I thought I told you to stop. And I thought, whoa, hang on a sec there, buddy. Whose channel is this? But I can see where some of the concern comes from. I imagine, though, it's just how it's used. Because right now, I think, like watching your videos, I love having something to look at while I'm hearing the story. I'm a very visual person. And so having images especially if they're as dynamic and colorful as the ones that you have on your videos, while you're talking about it, and just that slow, the camera slowly panning across or zooming in or something like that, I
Yeah.
think that adds so much more to it. And I think a mix of that with your idea of really nice photographed models and good setting terrain and stuff like that, I don't see how that could be a detriment to any aspect of the hobby whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree. Um, the 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 art is, I, luckily we don't have to use my personal crayon drawings because that would be absolutely
Oh yeah.
fantastic if I tried to make it. Um, but I spent a lot of time trying to get the AI to produce art that matches the story. And I spent a lot of time thinking through the script, working through it, and being like, okay, what would be a cool scene to represent what's being talked about here? And so for my lore breakdown videos, which range between 10 minutes, recently 10 to 15 minutes, some of the older ones around 5, I'll produce maybe 150 pictures.
Oh,
Um, and so those hour-long ones, we get close to 500 pictures that I'm producing and working through and trying to pick the right ones and come up. So a lot of efforts trying to put into the AI art, and as hopefully that makes up for the fact that I'm using AI and instead of learning how to paint.
well, no, I felt the exact same way, because it's one thing if I take someone else's picture and put it on there. Now, I have done that because, for example, I've used one page rules images when I did a video about the secrets of Tishal for that campaign. I mean, what
Mhm.
better picture to use than theirs? But like you, when I'm doing other stuff, if it takes me hours sitting there telling the AI what I want, getting the result, being like, no, not that, trying to change this, trying to change that, I'm now, I think, adding enough effort to it that it's not copying. It's I wouldn't quite call it a 100% original creation, but I don't see the difference between that and, for example, a musician who's inspired by two or three different other musicians, taking elements of their music and then creating something that's new. So with AI, I look at it as I'm getting a computer to help pull ideas from all over, and it presents me something, and then I can say, well, I like that, but I don't like that, and change this, and then it goes back, and it's very much a creative process in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree. It's
And
that
for
iterative creative
500
process.
pictures, that's a lot of pictures.
I think I have uh, about 100 gigabytes of pictures for my videos because I store all of them.
Yeah, and like you, I'm actually about 2 gigabytes away from having to buy a new hard drive, because between STL files and video files and stuff like that, my terabyte hard drive is full. So I
Same.
never thought that would be a problem when I bought it. But then again, I wasn't doing a YouTube channel when I bought it, so
Yeah.
we never know which direction we're going to go here.
Oh, that's very true.
So one thing, when I was looking through your channel, I noticed you have branched out a little bit. You have a video based on Helldivers, obviously
Yes.
because of the game, or did you read the books beforehand?
No, because of the game.
Because of the game. So a good friend of mine, who she's big into wargaming too, she actually was painting up a squad of scouts, Space Marine scouts, and they were this very strange color scheme. And I asked her, like, what was the inspiration for this? She's like, there's this book I heard about called Helldivers. So I went and read the first one. I thought, well, this is pretty good, but that was several years ago. And when my son suddenly comes up to me, he's like, hey, Dad, you got to check out this new game. And I'm like, oh yeah, what is it? It was called Helldivers. And I thought, no. So is it? Are you going to start branching out to other lore systems, if I can call them that, or was this just a one-off?
Um, I would like to branch into more lore systems in, be it video game or other tabletop RPGs or tabletop war games, or even my own. But there's a tightrope walk here of I've been making only one page rules lore videos up to this point, and so too much of a dramatic shift might make my fan base a little unhappy, especially if it makes it so they don't get a lore breakdown video of their favorite faction they've been waiting for a while. So
That's true.
I'm
Yeah.
still trying to investigate that. Um, I made that Helldivers video because uh, one, I I have a decent voice, and I thought it would be really fun to try to emulate that high energy propaganda voice for that Helldivers uses. And also, I really like making PowerPoints and animation. So I mixed the two together, came up with a little animation in PowerPoint, and threw together a video for a major order that was going to be especially difficult. And so then posted it on Reddit, and it did decently.
That's pretty cool. So I can't believe I didn't think to ask this earlier. So with you being so big into lore and so enamored with the Zerg, how come your first channel wasn't a StarCraft lore channel?
Because StarCraft lore is a little sparse.
Oh, okay.
And coming from someone who made, an hour-long lore video off of essentially 5 paragraphs of the Soul Snatchers. Uh,
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
no, the truth is, it 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 has depth, but the depth never captured my interest. I
Interesting.
like the aesthetic of the Zerg, but not necessarily the story of the Zerg. I especially like the idea of the creep that the Zerg lay down, and it becomes the life source for the Zerg, that they can move on faster, or they heal faster on it, and just the idea of that spreading influence is great. And I'm also a huge fan of the hive mind concept. But outside of those two things, StarCraft 2 lore didn't really capture me very much. Its gameplay did, but not its lore. And that's where One Page Rules lore was like, oh, this is familiar, but different enough that I'm interested.
Now, with your foray into Blizzard games, did you ever make the jump into World of Warcraft?
Um, I have about 6 hours of World of Warcraft played in my entire life.
Oh, okay. So I was going to say, if you like lore, that's something, at least from what I hear from my brother, who, for those of you listening, he was the one I interviewed a couple months ago. That lore is as deep as the ocean, and they keep
Hmm.
adding more. But it's also really, really popular. So I
Yes.
think by you've carved out your spot here as kind of, as far as I know, there aren't too many other people that do one page rules lore, and especially not dedicated. Like I said,
Yeah.
I'm going to touch on it, but nothing to the extent that will be on your channel. So don't worry, I'm not planning on stepping on your territory or anything.
Free to step on my territory. I welcome everyone. So if anyone wants to make lore videos, One Page Rules, please feel free. Contact me if you need help. I'm always willing to talk about One Page Rules lore. But the one of the reasons why I went specifically after One Page Rules lore in, is partially because of the niche, but more, um, no one was really paying attention to it when it was released last year. And I'm like, this is great lore, guys. We need to be talking about this more. And I wanted to make it more approachable, because most people that I know in wargaming, they get their lore from watching YouTube videos, and
Yes.
they'll listen to it while working or whatever. So I wanted to make it more approachable. Um, Also to make it so people actually know there's lore.
Well, that's
That's
no, absolutely. I know most of the lore I knew about 40K was just like you said. I'd sit down to paint, and I'd put on a lore video, and usually they run anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour and a half or so. And by that point, I probably need to take a break from painting, and I'm getting two things done at once. Well, it's all
Mhm.
still immersed in the hobby. So no, I think you're definitely providing a necessary service, if I could call it that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
let's
you
see
brought up a
here.
good point
Go ahead.
about your painting session. The I try to make my expanded lore videos about as long as a normal painting session. So you put on one video, you listen to it, and then by the time it's done, you're done. And then the lore breakdown videos is more of like, you might get through 2 or 3 of them if you're doing a quick painting session. But I'm trying to match up all of my content to that concept of, I've got 30 minutes to an hour to paint. Let's put something on to listen to.
Yeah. And I like when you can use the thing you're listening to comment kind of as your stopwatch.
Hmm.
So you can put on the video and say, I'll paint until this is over. So if I know I've got an hour or so, let me find a nice hour video. So it's I think it matches up really nicely that you would have your initial video, which would be 5-10 minutes, and it's kind of, here's your teaser. Taste. See what you think of this faction. And if you like it, I've got another video over here where we go in a little bit more in detail. And then you said you're also adding the shorts. It's almost like you have, 3 stages. Quick sample, a little bit more, and then, spend the next hour just immersed in that whole idea.
You've revealed my secret
Well,
recipe.
see, the thing is, I had that same idea. So either, great minds think alike, or simple minds seldom differ. It's one of the two. So about how long does it take you to put together, from script writing to creating the images to recording to editing? Say one of the shorter videos, the 10 to 15 minute ones. How much time would you say you put into those?
Probably around 20 hours
Sounds
on
about right.
the low end. So the funny part about it is that one of the most time consuming pieces is the script writing, of course. And then the next one is actually recording and editing just the audio itself. Because I, for some reason, when I was a kid, I couldn't figure out how to read. And so I learned how to read when I was 12. With that comes the fact that I never really got the practice as a young kid on reading out loud. And so I struggle even to this day reading out loud. And part of the reason why I made the channel is to force me to get practice on reading a script out loud. So that way I can enunciate and bring appropriate feeling into it without completely stumbling all over the place. And so I'll probably have 3 times as much audio as what eventually gets put into one of those videos.
Interesting.
And so that takes time to narrow down quite a bit.
Oh, I'm right there with you, where I'll write the script and go over it probably 2, 3, at least 3 times before I say, okay, I think it's ready to record. And then as you start recording, I'll say some sentence or I'll say some paragraph and be like, that's not the tone that I meant. That's coming across more this than that. And so stop, delete, redo. So I never thought it would involve that much of a process. Yeah. I imagine everyone who watches I don't know if this is a true statement, but you watch like a 20-minute YouTube video and you think, yeah, it probably took them a couple hours to make that. And you don't realize until you start making it just how much is involved.
Yeah, with me it's I will often mess up words. And so one of these days I should release the outtakes.
Clips. Yeah, the outtakes.
Because some of them are funnier than others, but the big one will be, I'll put the enunciation in the middle of a word that you would normally put on the end of a sentence, and it's in the middle of a sentence. Yeah. And so it just sounds clunky, like, oh, I forgot there's not only more of this word, but there's more of this sentence that I need to say.
Yeah, it happens. Or I'll forget. Yep, I know exactly what you mean. Where on the page, the line has ended, but the sentence hasn't. So I trail off my voice at the end of the line, then realize, oh, no, there's still 6 more words. Now I got to go back and redo the whole thing.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's fun talking shop. I don't know how many of my listeners want to hear the ins and outs of video editing. So let's get back then to lore here. So what are maybe the next couple factions or focuses for your channel? Yeah, what do you think is next on the menu?
So I have 2 requests on my plate right now for lore videos. One is for the lore breakdown, so a 10-minute to 15-minute video on the Titan Lords. And then my next long video, it was requested to be for the Ratman clans. I'm excited for the Titan Lords and the Ratman clans, but I'm a little more excited for the Titan Lords because of how much the Titan Lords lore reminds me of Helldivers 2.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because Helldivers 2, to me, is, it's a bunch of well-equipped equipped military people dropping down on a planet in a small squad. And I know this is not the official lore, but when you're playing it, you'll have your own ship, and you have your own. You get to spend all your money on stuff, and it just feels like a bunch of rich, wealthy people cosplaying as commandos dropping on a planet. And that fits right in line with the Titan Lords lore of these really rich people got bored with their rich life, so they wanted to experience the mercenary life, but no, that was a little too intense. So let's build these giant robots that we can have parties in while causing mayhem on the on
Who
whatever
says you
planet
can't
we're
go
on.
to war in style?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of inspiration, cross inspiration there that I'm interested in there. And then the Ratman clans, um, I'm I love the Ratman clans because I was traumatized as a child by the movie The Secret of Nim.
I was
Like
actually going to
many,
mention that. Go ahead. Yeah.
and so like many of us were traumatized by that fantastic movie. It's got some of that same through line, and so the idea of the Battle Brothers scientists having a small number of rodents that they have to continually experiment on until eventually they become sapient. And like, wait a second, this isn't right. Let's go build spaceships. That is so cool.
And yeah, that's one of those areas where I enjoy watching how One Page Rules tries on the one hand to recognize, okay, they built off of 40K lore, so there's some things they're kind of married to. But there's other things where they don't have to copy. And so in the Warhammer world, the Skaven are these dirty, filthy, like they're rats. They're the kind of like Black Death rats. Nobody wants them around. They're totally hated. But that's why I started thinking Secret of Nim for One Page Rules. It's a flip, but it doesn't feel like they just went, okay, so 40K and Warhammer Fantasy made the Skaven these awful creatures, so we'll do the opposite of that just to be different. So I'm very curious to see what you develop for the Ratmen.
Yeah, they're a fun faction, and they've actually got a very dedicated following. So I got over 100 votes on what I should do for a next long video, and the majority of them went to the Ratman clans.
Went to the
Which,
Ratmen. Fascinating.
yeah, I do community polls for every single one of my long videos, and the thing that I found most interesting is the Battle Brothers lose every time.
People are just getting. I mean, they're tired. If they're coming over from Warhammer, they're just tired of Space Marines.
Exactly.
That
And
makes
it's not
perfect
even
sense.
it's not even like a little close. It's usually just a landslide.
Yeah, I imagine that's just GW fatigue. So all the armies that never got a whole lot of love, now they can get it,
Hmm.
and that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. Well, we are actually we're just a little past my usual. I try and target these for about 45 minutes or so. So in closing, last couple comments here. Anything you would like to mention, talk about, throw out there? Anything you want to end our interview on?
No, it's been fantastic to speak with you, and I look forward to making more lore videos for people. So please pay attention to the lore and One Page Rules. It's fantastic. The rules are great. The lore is great. So buy the lore book the world book if you can, and pay attention to my channel and enjoy my attempts at retelling it.
And for everybody, there will be down in the description. I'll make sure I put a link or everything you need to know to go over to the channel and listen to all of his lore videos. You've already heard how soothing and melodious his voice is. So now just imagine that without me interjecting and breaking it, because I don't exactly have the same kind of enjoyable cadence, if you will. I hope you thought this was good enough. Keep your dice on the table, and we'll see you next time.